Oh, up here. Yeah, woo! Okay, great.
Testing.
Welcome, everybody. Who's excited to be here? That was really pathetic. Who's excited to be here? Yay! Who's excited for the general election? Oh, why are you here then? Okay, welcome everyone to probably the best panel of TWT this year. I hope you're all comfortable in your seats. We are going to be talking all things general election 2024. And we have a brilliant panel who are going to help us along the way, and then hopefully we'll have a chance to hear from all of you as well. So the way this is going to work is we're going to hear from our 4 fabulous speakers for about 6 minutes each, and then we will pass the mics over to you, and we want questions, thoughts, feelings, things you're working on that are part of the conversation about what the left broadly should do about the general election in 2024. My name's Beth, and I'm a TWT volunteer. Oh, thank you. Okay, so we have a general election fast approaching. I don't know who else feels this way, but it's come around real quick. And it's not necessarily the one that we all feel most excited for. I think that's definitely something we can all admit. And so what we all do next year, how we work and how our organising and activism leads up to that election are really important questions going forward. And hopefully these speakers are going to help us think that through. So I'm going to start off with Andrew. Andrew works in movement building and was formerly Momentum's political coordinator and an advisor to Labour. So Andrew, you've got 6 minutes and I'll wave at you if you go over.
Okay. Hi everybody. I'll try not to look too much at my laptop, but I've took some notes just to hopefully make sure I say something that makes sense. So I'll talk a little bit, as Beth said, about what tools we might have to impact on the election, but also thinking about what comes after the election, because obviously the election probably will see the end of a Tory government. It opens up new political challenges and opportunities with a Labour government, so we want to think about not just the election, but what comes after. And I think it is probably likely now that we are going to get a Labour majority government. And you know, the end of the Tory party, I don't think we should kind of underestimate the impact of that, or at least the end of this government stretch. They are, as we saw from the last conference, a radical right party, intent on waging war on some of the most marginalised and undermining the kind of basic necessary responses to climate change. So I think seeing the back of these people is something that we shouldn't really underestimate. We're in a really dangerous moment. I think that is a victory in itself. Now, obviously, Labour poses a lot of challenges now and in government. Clearly, they've adopted a strategy of kind of embracing the status quo, social conservatism, financial orthodoxy, and mimicking the Tories, especially on things like our attitude to migrants. And we saw that with the kind of dismal response to Suella Braverman's speech this week from the Labour leadership, who kind of tried to outdo the Tories on that anti-migrant rhetoric. And this has a real-world impact on people, this type of politics, and we shouldn't underestimate that. And I do think it's important over the next 12 months in all of our work, we foreground our solidarity with migrants, with trans people, and all of those that are being thrown under the bus by this strategy that Labour's pursuing right now, which is to kind of align with the Tories as much as possible and not shake that status quo. I think it's important to note there will be some benefits for Labour government. There's some okay policies on climate investment, workers' rights, and votes at 16. And it is a key task, I think, to try and defend those lines over the next 12 months so we get something out of that next election. Now, in terms of thinking about that next election and how we impact on it, what power do we have in the current moment? Typically 2 ways that people tend to think about that, I think. There's kind of what roots we have inside the party to have influence on Labour's direction and what impact we can have outside the party. Now, I worked for 2 years at Momentum and worked with some amazing people, and I think the work they're doing, and Momentum members are doing, and left-wing members in Labour are doing, is so strategically important. Defending footholds in the party where we have it, pushing back on policy, trying to get good local socialist candidates selected. But unfortunately, it's not work in the current moment that can scale up that much. So when we think about the next 12 months, even though it's really strategically important work, it's going to be really difficult for the left in Labour to make those gains or to be able to push Labour noticeably to the left. It's important work, but it's work that probably has a limited impact in the current moment. So I think we need to be thinking a little bit more about what kind of impact and pressure we can have from outside the party on the current situation. And, you know, there's not really a single lever we can look to kind of pull to have that impact, we might look to the way UKIP functioned in 2015, where they got 120 second-place seats and pretty much dictated the agenda of the next 5-6 years, pushing Brexit to the forefront. Now, because of the very structural factors and challenges that the left faces, I don't think we're in a position right now where a kind of left of Labour Party could have anywhere near that impact. Though I do think there will be some instances where the way we put pressure on the Labour Party from the left is to support Green Party candidates, independent candidates in certain seats where they have a realistic chance of kind of pushing Labour left. I think there are other strategies and tactics we can look to use to do that. I was really excited to hear this year, for example, that Greenpeace are deploying for the first time a big organising style drive, mass canvassing, speaking to tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people about climate change. And I know Green New Deal Rising are thinking of doing the same. And the logic there is, how do you build a base or a block of voters that identify with a core set of progressive issues and are willing to vote on those issues and not just vote out of loyalty to Labour? And that's really about kind of creating a block that Labour feels accountable to. I also think over the next 12 months, the type of direct action that we're seeing from the climate movement, which shatters that illusion of political consensus and pushes key issues to the forefront, is really important, and we need to see more of that. I'd also like to see different leverage campaigns in certain constituencies, going back to my first point about where can we put pressure on candidates. You know, I was up in Scotland a year ago with the IWGB, who basically went mass door knocking in a constituency in Scotland to put pressure on the politicians there to adopt a kind of a pro-foster care position. There's a struggle up there at the moment. And I think we can take those tactics, which we can do outside of the party, to pick certain races where we intervene, we door knock, we put pressure on politicians to adopt certain positions and take up certain agendas. I also think we have to be open to supporting different types of campaigns. You'll see Jamie Driscoll standing for the North East mayoralty this year, or next year I should say. Not only I think is it best for people in that region to vote for Jamie and get behind that campaign, but a big, visible, independent campaign I think will have a pressure and effect on Labour nationally. So if you are in that area, I'd suggest kind of getting behind that campaign. So I think there's like various different tactics and strategies we can deploy at the moment, but I think we also have to be realistic. Under first past the post, it provides a kind of insulating effect from political insurgency. You know, some votes are worth more than others, and even if we build these blocks of voters who say we're going to vote on climate change and public ownership, the reality is first past the post funnels those votes into usually one of three parties or one of two parties. So it's important to think about those limits, but this goes back to my first point that I opened with, that the general election shouldn't just be seen as an outcome and an end, but we should see our work as about base building and establishing political leadership for what is to come. Because we've all seen across Europe how dissatisfaction with centrist governments tends to be captured and articulated by the far right. And that's going to be the major challenge for the left, to try to establish a degree of political leadership over the inevitable dissatisfaction that does arise in opposition to a centrist government that isn't willing to break from the status quo. So when I talk about the types of mass canvassing that Greenpeace are doing, the type of leverage campaigns we could run in certain seats by backing independents or Green Party candidates, fundamentally this is about building a base, politicising certain issues and establishing political leadership. I think the reality is the impact this will have on the next election may well be minimal, but we put ourselves in a much better position for what comes after, which in reality is the real struggle. How do we impact on a Labour government with a large majority that's not willing to break from the status quo? And on that point of having that organising capacity outside of parties, I think if you look at the US, they're just in a much better position than we are there, whatever the difficulties with the US political system, which is kind of captured by money. If you think about organisations like the Sunrise Movement, the Working Families Party, they're able to run mass organising campaigns outside of the Democratic Party structure and impact on races, get candidates selected in a way that we're not here. We just don't have that ecosystem of organisations. So I'd like to see over the next few years us build that community organising capacity that we can deploy in election moments to support certain candidates who support our agenda. And I just kind of finish up by saying a couple of things finally. Obviously, like, the reality is we're going to get a Labour and a Tory government, and a Labour government is the better of those two outcomes. But we can't let that have a disciplining effect on the type of organising, the type of politics that we do. It's precisely because of that that we need to be willing to break the line, back candidates that aren't Labour Party candidates, if we think it's a realistic chance of winning and can shift the political dial a little bit. So I think we need an openness there in terms of how we approach the election. But as I said, maybe there are limits to what we can achieve in 12 months without the infrastructure that I've talked about, but it is about base building, establishing political leadership for what comes after, and making sure any opposition that comes to this Labour government is led by the left and is articulated in a progressive way, because we are in quite a dangerous moment. So I don't think we can sit this out, even if the impact we can have in the election is quite limited in the current moment.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Lots to think about. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to pass on to our next speaker, who is Fatima, who is the co-executive director of Green New Deal Rising.
Thanks for having me, and it's really nice to be back in Liverpool. The last time I was in this room was the rally last year, where I was sat in that corner sort of getting chills as John MacDonald, Mick Lynch, or Zara Sultana were giving rousing speeches, so it's nice to be back here. And my thoughts are a lot less progressed than Andrew's, and I'll probably second a lot of what you said. So I'm Fatima Ibrahim. I am a climate activist. I run an organization I helped co-found 4 years ago called Green New Deal Rising. The movement element of it is only 2 years old. And we are a climate justice movement campaigning around the Green New Deal, which is, an approach to tackling the climate crisis that also tackles inequality. That in tackling the climate crisis, we can create millions of green new jobs. We can have thriving public services. We can invest in communities in our care sector. We can have free and affordable public transport. And so those sort of big programs of government that make people's lives better in real terms immediately while also tackling the climate crisis. We sort of, Green New Deal Rising's perspective and my perspective is actually we're a social movement. We're outside of the Labour Party. Me personally, I made a decision at 9 to never join the Labour Party or a political party. And you can imagine, I'm 30 years old, do the calculation, what was happening when I was 9 years old, who was in government and what were they doing. So that's my relationship with the Labour Party. But I think that's, was foundational to me to understand that political parties are a vehicle. They're a necessary vehicle for change, but that's all they are. And that there are lots of different vehicles we need to engage in, but our commitment needs to be to the vision, to the mission, and we need to be pragmatic about how we use these different vehicles towards change. And so I think that's potentially what gives me maybe a little resilience in this moment. I was a bit nervous coming here because that is my perspective. And so the state of the Labour Party is hurtful and it's disappointing, but it isn't personal to me in the same way. And I know it's personal to a lot of people in this room. And so take what I say or leave it, but that is the perspective that I bring. So Green New Deal Rising has been doing a lot of work in its early days exposing the Conservative Party, because a few years ago there was a Boris-led government who was talking the talk on climate change, was wanting to be a leader in the world on climate change. So the sort of problem we saw then was we could have Boris go into an election and people think actually the Conservatives are the party of climate change. And so we really focused on exposing the Tories. The tactic that we use is bird dogging or doorstepping, disrupting their fundraisers, challenging them on the street. One of our most viral ones was disrupting a fundraiser that Priti Patel was doing in her constituency. To kind of, force these politicians to stare into the eyes of the futures that they're essentially lighting on fire, but also those videos inspire people at home to show if these young people are there sort of taking control of their political futures, why can't we? We've transformed into now, 18 months ago, we rerouted our attention to the Labour Party and to the SNP. The Labour Party because it became very clear that next election we would have a new government and that would be a Labour Party government, but we weren't happy for Labour to just walk into power. That we actually needed to dictate the terms in which they were elected, the mandate on which they were elected. So we launched our Labour Be Bold campaign, which, drew criticism from lots of different ranks, from people who are in the Labour Party being like, why are you targeting and disrupting the Labour Party when the Conservatives exist? And people who felt like, we should just give up on the Labour Party, and why are you engaging? There's no real chance that they could do anything different. And our position is, as long as, this is the most important election of our lifetimes, we are halfway through a decade that we have to radically transform how our economies work. Science has set that out. 2030 is actually now only 6 years away. And if by 2030 we have not transformed our economies and our communities, we only have to look at what's happened this summer to imagine what 2030 might even look like, whether it's wildfires or floods or, or just like the wide-scale destruction that's playing around the world. And so we can't give up on this election. And so the focus that we've taken is a few different fronts. One, to kind of put as much pressure on the Labour Party as possible to make the case that actually you can't tackle the climate crisis unless you consider public ownership. You can't tackle the climate crisis unless you tax wealth, that you need to commit to a green jobs guarantee and a national nature service, and that we need an internationalist Labour, that we need a UK that's facing outwards and working with its partners internationally to make sure that we're doing our fair bit. On the organizing side, actually, I'm going to correct something Andrew said, is we've actually been organizing in battlegrounds for the past 2 years, and we inspired Greenpeace's approach to canvassing. And so there are constituencies up and down the country where we've invested in leadership development, and we've started cutting turf. We've started talking to people about what are the issues that are most important to them, how do we connect the climate crisis to the things that they're worried about, whether it's the NHS or pollution or their children's futures and education. And that's because, one, we think we need to secure the existing champions that we have in Parliament. Two, there's going to be a majority that brings in a new generation of MPs, right? We might have a moment that was the same for the Tories in 2019, where we get a new generation of MPs. And so we started engaging in selections. We're probably one of the only ever climate movements that has gone into constituencies and tried to hack the selection process. And we've had varying degrees of success, and because of the state of the politics, I probably won't speak to the selections we've engaged in, because we do want to sort of protect and secure the candidates that we are supporting. We're also, and we're also doing canvassing and thinking about how we engage young people in the election going forward. Just as one example to sort of end on, last year, the Net Zero Scrutiny Committee was kind of in a rut. They weren't seeing much progress when it came to influencing the Conservatives' approach to net zero. They were hacking away at it, but there was no success. The Uxbridge by-election changed everything. And there's a straight line between the ULEZ fight in Uxbridge and where Rishi Sunak sort of landed it last week. And how did that happen? That happened through organizing, something Conservatives don't often do. But in Uxbridge, I live in the neighboring constituency. On the door, people were talking about ULEZ. Despite 90% of people not being affected by ULEZ, it was the thing they were talking about. And it's because it's the thing that when the Conservatives were knocking on the door and organizing, they were being told about. And canvassing and organizing is in our organizing tradition. It's something that belongs to the left. And so I think my plea in some of the ways that we sort of come back from this is we don't rely on party structures to do canvassing. We don't wait for the election and the candidate to come round to do canvassing. We need to build deep relationships with communities and be canvassing throughout the year. That's how we sort of bypass the media. That's how we sort of get our messages directly to households. The last thing is leadership development, which is one thing I noted that from an outside perspective, I don't think the left does well. And I actually think the Conservatives or the Republicans in the US do very well. They plan elections 30 years out. They find young people they're interested in molding to go into power 30 years out. And I understand that. It's because we care about our communities and we're thinking about tomorrow, but a part of us needs to be thinking about who are going to be the leaders that take charge, who take power 30 years from now. We might not win this election, but who's thinking about the election after that and the election after that? The problems we face are not going away, and there just isn't enough exciting leaders coming from our movements who can take power, who can inspire people, who can be pragmatic. And so that's one of the things that we want to do with Green New Deal Rising, but we need way more support in doing that.
Thank you so much. That was loads of great points and lots of calls to action, so I hope everyone's taking notes. Okay, our next speaker is James, who is the Communications Director at Progressive International and was formerly the Director of Strategic Comms to Jeremy Corbyn.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Beth. I agree with a lot of what Andrew and Fatima just said, but I come to kind of the opposite conclusion, which is that there's nothing that we can do to directly influence the next election, and we shouldn't try. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't do anything at all. In fact, it's absolutely vital that we do really rather a lot to build as much power as we can possibly have for the day after the election. And the reason why I argue that's based on where I think the next, let's say the next 3 years, what's the trend outcome, what's the most likely thing, and I think we'll have pretty much shared analysis on this, which is the cost of living crisis is going to get worse, climate breakdown is beginning to get non-linear and running away from us, which will make the cost of living crisis that much worse, and there are massive geopolitical tensions and stresses which will make action on climate change that much less likely, and will also make the cost of living crisis worse. The Tories are going to lose the next election, and they deserve to lose the next election, and it's good that they lose the next election. And they will be replaced by a do-nothing Labour government that will do nothing to deal with those three big mega issues that will shape the context. And the Tory party is already, as Andrew said, a radical right party, and it will go further into that direction, most likely, after it loses in opposition. It will be a hard right party. But also there is a big hard right media infrastructure, and most of the so-called mainstream media also is part of a hard right media infrastructure. And that will be the main pole of opposition to a do-nothing, technocratic Labour government in the context of people's lives getting worse for those three major reasons. And so the hard right will frame itself as the opposition to that government on the side of the people, on the side of working people, ordinary people. That's how it will be presented. So that's the context in which we're dealing with. So could we influence the election to try to make that not happen or make that happen in a different way? You can't influence the Labour Party. It's not possible. Like, we've seen what's happened. Look at it objectively. There is no influencing the leadership of the Labour Party. It's not, it's not going to happen. There's no inside game to play. And you can't change what a general election is about. We would all love to turn the election into a climate change election, but there's only one man who can do that, and his name is Rishi Sunak. Right? We can't do that because, and I know I did this job, two people set what's going to be in the news each day in the general election. The person who's running comms for the Labour Party and the person who's running comms for the Conservative Party. The broadcasters legally have to cover the story that they want during the election period to ensure balance. So it's extraordinarily difficult for outside forces to intervene to set the agenda in any major way. Of course, big events can happen, and that influences the election. But, we saw this in the last election, for example. Extinction Rebellion took a whole load of actions, bees glued to buses, and so on and so forth. No media attention, basically. Didn't have the impact. So, what do we do? If the election is basically a bit of a red herring for us, but the world is getting worse, things need to be done, what can we do? And how can we build power for afterwards? Because we need to build a powerful left pole of opposition to the next government, both inside the Labour Party, outside the Labour Party, in Parliament, in the streets, in social movements, in trade unions, in workplaces, and so on and so forth. So how do we do that? First, at a kind of national level, we need to encourage all of the organisations that we're part of that would form part of that left pole, a united left pole of opposition, to start working together, to start coordinating together, to form some kind of apparatus that can intervene and does intervene in a consistent way. So trade union general secretaries are working together. They are not pursuing only their own struggle. Take, for example, the 1st of February this year, biggest strike day that the country's seen for an extremely long period of time, 5 major trade unions all out on strike together. Imagine what would have happened if the day started at 7 a.m. with the 5 of them all on the same picket line, all at the same press conference, saying, what each of their issues are, and saying we need a £15 an hour minimum wage, and we need, Britain needs an entire pay rise, and makes that a full-fronted political assault against the political situation. That would have way more impact, and we need to be able to do those kinds of things and unite all of our various issues together and have that power. And that isn't just the top level, what are the general secretaries of trade unions, what are the leaders of the climate movement, what are those people doing? We all have to do that building power where we are, which means linking up the tenants union, the trade union branch, the local Just Stop Oil group or Extinction Rebellion group, the Black Lives Matter group, so that we are coordinating actions now in the here and now before the election, not about the election, but about the real struggle that people are facing. So we are in a much stronger position, locally and nationally, to put forward a real left pole of opposition, which is going to be so desperately needed, because, yes, the Tories are going, and that's a good thing, but stuff isn't getting better. So it's time, we really have to organise for the day after. Thanks.
Thank you, James. That was exactly 6 minutes. Well done. Last but definitely not least is Frankie, who is the Young Members Representative on Unite's National Executive Council and the former chair of Unite's National Young Members.
Hello. It's hard to go after all of these extremely erudite speakers, of which I agree and disagree with lots of points. So I'm going to try and formulate why. And I wonder, am I one of the only Labour members left on this panel? I just think it's an interesting talking point. You still in? Let's see what happens tomorrow. That's my dalliances whenever we speak publicly is like, will I survive tomorrow? Maybe. We live to fight another day. So yeah, I'm on Unite's Executive Council. It's a lay member structure. I was elected, hopefully, by some people in here who are under the ripe old age of 30, which is what a young member in a trade union is nowadays, to fight and advocate for my constituency, which is young members on our National Executive Council. And I'm here in Liverpool because I have the wonderful task of being part of Unite's official delegation to Labour Party conference. So I'm going to come at it from a kind of trade union perspective for now, and then touch on the kind of elements around outside organising after that. I'm still in the Labour Party, and I used to work for the Labour Party as well. James and I are ex-colleagues, because I don't really know what else to do. That's my honest answer. I have a lot of frustrations with the Labour Party at the moment. My politics are not the same as Keir Starmer's. I'm very public about that as well. But until my trade union decides to walk away from the Labour Party, my loyalty lies with my trade union. I am first and foremost like a workers' rights activist, I guess. I was a rep at work for a long time. And the argument that the trade unions put forward at the moment for staying in the Labour Party and working towards a Labour victory for the general election is essentially kind of pinned on one person, which is Angela Rayner. And, people have lots of different opinions about Angela Rayner. I won't get into those. I'm not here to either defend or offend. But the one piece of work that she's put forward is this workers' rights charter. Just out of interest, has anyone heard of that? Just crack your hand up. That's a good thing. In that charter, we basically advocate for better rights for trade unionists and people, whether that's about getting better wages or trying to dismantle the archaic strike clause that Margaret Thatcher put in place to destroy the trade unions. Now, she did fail in that task, which is why unions like Unite still exist, and they have power. And where do they have this kind of exemplary power, I guess? They have it in the Labour Party. That's why I'm going to go and vote at the Labour Party conference with my Unite hat on. Now, the thing is, as a trade unionist, you have the opportunity within your union to send what you would like the union to say at Labour Party conference on your behalf. We don't decide those positions. We sit together in a delegation meeting and we essentially make representations from the people that come to us and say, can you vote for this or can you vote against that? Now that's organising. It's old school organising, but it's that constituency representation that is extremely important. Now, when you consider the fact that Keir Starmer's Labour Party put out a leaflet the other day saying they had more business delegates, not members attending, but delegates to conference than ever, that small slither of trade union representation becomes even more important, because you're going to argue on the floor, right, about rights against workers, against employers who would like to see your rights for workers in the dirt. So in terms of what happens in the general election 2024, I see both arguments about organising outside, and I see arguments about organising inside. So I suppose I'm going to do that awful Keir-like thing and sit on the fence and say, let's do both. Because the importance, right, of having voices within the Labour movement always brings me back to the first day I started working in Jeremy's office, right? Which is that my institutional knowledge of the Labour Party and its structures, which are complex and bureaucratic, was none. But there were some older people who'd stayed in the Labour Party during the years of Iraq, during the wars of Tony Blair, who taught us how to navigate those structures. Now, I don't see myself in some grand position in 30 years' time, but I hope one day I can return the favour to some young, plucky activist who, God knows how, but we've managed to take the leadership once again and is looking for ways to navigate those bureaucratic structures from old hands who understand, sadly, how the Labour Party operates. Now, I would like to live in a world where we could think bigger than the Labour Party when it comes to parliamentary politics, but I am first and foremost a realist, right? And there isn't another world there yet. So until that happens, and I advocate and support for those who are trying to make that happen, I will sit and I will wait and I will do my small little sad things in the Labour Party with my union to try and advocate for keeping a space for those opinions to be heard, even if they're not listened to. At least there is a platform for those things, so that in the future, if our influencing position changes and grows because of the work of people outside, you have a foothold in the party to try and put that in place. And the last thing that I'll touch on is that many of you will have seen the news this morning about Israel and Palestine. And if the Labour Party is going to be the government next year, I want to ensure that there are groups like Palestine Solidarity Campaign, the trade unions, and other groups that are advocating inside the party for the voices of people who are oppressed all over the world. And if we can get a tiny, and I mean a tiny, fraction of what we want internationally coming out of a Labour Party government, I believe that is success. And some people will disagree with that and they'll say it's a waste of time. But if there are people willing to do that, I think there's no issue with that. We should support everyone doing everything they can to advocate for a better future in the next general election and for the rest of time. Thank you.
Wow, lots to think about. Thank you so much to our lovely speakers for lots of kind of different perspectives, which hopefully is going to be really helpful for our conversation going forward, and lots of things for our to-do list. We are now going to take questions, thoughts, comments, arguments from the floor. Please feel free to kind of bring this debate alive a bit, and when I feel like it is necessary, I'm going to come back to the speakers to interject with some comments and perspectives. We're going to do this in kind of rounds of 3 to start with and see how it goes. It would be great if people could keep their contributions to like 1-2 minutes so we can fit as many people in as possible, and please remember to be kind and comradely. Where's my roving mic? We got it at the back? Great, okay. So should we start off with our comrade in the grey jumper at the front, and then we'll take our comrade behind with the, oh, I don't know what colour that is. I can't think of the beige, and then we'll go from there. Thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to ask the panelists, to what extent do you think it would be useful? Because I can see a future where after the election, there's a lot of straw manning of the left and trying to say, oh, they're the real opposition. They're the ones who are like tearing into the Labour Party. So the left are really opposing the Labour Party and the Conservatives are opposing the Labour Party. And I wonder to what extent the panelists think it would be a good idea if we could support the Labour Party for some of the things they do and oppose them for some of the things they do and sort of become thought leaders of both, instead of just being a stick to the things we don't like about the Labour Party, also being a carrot to the things we do like, so that when they put forward a policy agenda, they can expect some sort of either celebration from the left or opposition from the left, and so that we would have more power rather than just being thought of as a stick all the time.
Thank you. Speakers, it'd be great if you could take some notes. Great.
Hello. I just have a simple question. It is, with the imminent Labour conference and the subsequent polling after such, and the rumoured Tory reshuffle, how likely do you feel that there will be a snap election quite recently, and does that worry you?
Great, thank you so much. Okay, just by your arm, comrade, there we go.
Mine was just a question. I was just wondering if you think that if there is a small majority for Labour, do you think that the Socialist Campaign Group will have any weight? And do you think that they'll be able to use that within Parliament to sort of, get us some good things?
Fantastic. I'm going to come to you in the next round. We'll just take some responses, if that's okay, because there was 3 questions there. Yeah, go.
I completely agree with you, and we've been speaking a lot too. So our movement is inspired by the Sunrise Movement in the US. So I've been talking to them and the Bernie folks, and one of the pieces of advice they gave us was like, when those in power do the things that you like, celebrate it hard. And when they don't do what you want, make sure you're out there bashing them. And I think we need to be able to show that kind of flexibility, not because we want to celebrate them, but because we want to secure the wins, I think, that we have gotten. So one of the things with the 28 billion, for example, and I've said this to people in the climate movement, the reason the 28 billion is not secure is because us as movements have not done enough work, to be honest, to seed it in the hearts and imaginations of the public, in the communities. So it is something that they can sort of cut by, cut and sort of reduce, or just today, Rachel Reeves was out saying some other nonsense about how she's going to curtail the 28 billion. And so I do, and we came to last conference, and when they made the focus of the conference climate, and when they announced a whole raft of climate policies that, to be honest, people in our movements helped draft, and we worked with Ed Miliband's office, I wrote to comrades on the left saying, we need to celebrate this. This is our wins. We're not celebrating them. We're celebrating the work of our movements and the work that we did together. And so let's not sort of cut off our noses to spite our faces by staying silent. So I think I totally agree with that. And to come back briefly to James, I think there are roles that we can play from now until the election. One, I don't believe people just show up. You need to build power through the election. So I agree, the biggest task we have is day one after the election, but the way that we sort of secure that leverage is by organizing to the election and ensuring that the parts of the agenda that we like have popular consensus, that we can point and show that they were elected because of these promises. In terms of a snap election, I've never predicted an election right, so I don't know. I hope it isn't, because my anxiety sort of goes up every time I consider an election before October next year. And the Socialist Campaign Group, I think, Socialist Campaign Group Plus, I think another brilliant thing that our friends in the US have done is they've looked at issue areas and they've tried to find groups of politicians that they could sort of bring together across the political spectrum around issue areas. And so I think this is where we kind of need to question our ideological purity test, that we can work with people who agree with us on climate issues that maybe don't agree with us on other things. And I think there is a lot of consensus around tackling the climate emergency and big, bold policies. So we should seek out a group within Parliament, even if they're not a part of the Socialist Campaign Group, to kind of be that vanguard and that sort of protective force around the climate policies or any other groups of policies that we're campaigning around.
Nice.
Yeah, so I agree with that point. Obviously, we should be kind of encouraging politicians when they do things right to go further in that direction. And that's part of what I said earlier in terms of defending the better parts of the programme, which, as Fatima said, in terms of like understanding where that came from, ultimately is because of the organising that many people in this room have done over the last decade to build a kind of anti-austerity consensus, or a consensus that climate change is a key issue. So it is important to recognise our agency and also to encourage Labour to go in better directions, most definitely. Does a snap election worry me? Did somebody say that maybe? Or when might it happen? Who knows? But the sooner we see the back of this government, I think ultimately the better, because they are on a very dangerous radical right road. What can the Socialist Campaign Group do? I have a lot of respect for them individually, have worked for one of them. But what will become difficult is the level of kind of discipline required and movement support to be able to resist the kind of pull that will come. It takes a lot of political conviction to potentially put at risk bringing down a Labour government, which will have to be the conversations they have with themselves. Are they willing to push towards the edge, to block Labour legislation, to get what they want in that legislation? And you've seen some of the tensions there with the Progressive Caucus in the US, where they've won some things but folded on others, because the kind of pressure that the Democratic establishment can put on them is quite significant. And we know that same pressure exists within our own political systems, not just within the Labour Party, but the kind of parliamentary isolation that those MPs tend to face in terms of being cut off from our movement. So if they are to do anything, it will require a slim majority so they have the numbers, and it will require a movement backing them up to the hill. And that's difficult things to achieve, but absolutely should be our aim if there is a small Labour minority, is to try and win concessions out of them.
Yeah, I agree with Andrew, and it makes me think back to that time when Robin Cook, was able to stand up in Parliament and decry the warmongering of Tony Blair in the Iraq War. And it makes me think about what will be the role of the SEG under a Labour Party government that, for all intents and purposes, is very similar to that one from 97. The issue is that depending on how big the majority is, the SEG will have a slight attempt at being able to block legislation. But if what we've seen in terms of the ruthlessness of the organising, which, to be honest, back in 2015, I probably wish we were a little bit more ruthless when I think back on it. But that kind of ruthlessness, they will probably make the SEG lose the whip. So then you have that big kind of like tactical conversation about whether the SEG would just like throw themselves, on the ground and say, I'm going to resign over this. What does that achieve in the long run? I don't know. I don't have the answers, but it's a question for the movement and it's a question for the SEG. In terms of a snap election, I mean, to be honest, what difference does it make, frankly? What you'll see, I think, is an absence of canvassers for the Labour Party in a snap election. So the only tactical thing I would say is the warmer the weather, maybe the better it will be for Labour, because, the mass canvassing and people power that you saw in 2015, 2017 and then 2019 as well, that's gone. And, the Labour Party knows that, which is why they're using every trick in the book to ensure that the bureaucracy protects them, not the people. It does put them in a position of weakness, but I do think they will still win the next election. I think the thing is that, it's so tricky, but I think the issue about, Andrew is right, look, at the end of the day, the Tory party at the moment is worse than the Labour Party that will form the next government. So you can advocate and even, vote for the Labour Party if you want to for the next election, but be part of those caucuses that are looking to advocate for change like anti-austerity, climate, supporting migrants, you name it, and ensuring that Labour, which is a real risk, I think, when they win the election, doesn't drift to the right to satisfy this constituency of people that are becoming more right-wing, violently right-wing, and that for me is where the opposition across all levels of whatever political organising you're in should be, because that is the threat, I think, in our communities, and Labour will capitulate. We've seen it already, what's happening to the Labour Party, and that, I think, is the biggest threat, and that's where we should put our people power in terms of organising to stop that happening.
Of course, if people do good things, they should be praised. There's just very, very little of it. And the bits that are there, the two areas, right, it's in policy terms, there's a gap between the Tories and Labour are much better on climate and on workers' rights. But those policies, when they were formulated, were non-reformist reforms. They were radical policies that implied a going further of the policies. And they have been stripped back, and we shouldn't be boosterish about them. We should say these are better, but let's not be boosterish about the 28 billion, which is a pot to subsidise private capital, a la Joe Biden and the Inflation Reduction Act, which is not written by the left, is written with Joe Manchin. Right? It's not a progressive piece of legislation. That's what's being copied. Likewise, on the Labour stuff, as in small L Labour stuff, there are some good workers' rights bits, but the sectoral collective bargaining, the thing where you'd have fair pay agreements by sector, that's the actually radical bit that would most boost people's living standards, transform lives. That's gone. So yes, but let's not be boosterish. No, there won't be a snap election. The election will be almost the last possible date it can happen, because turkeys don't vote for Christmas. And from the point of view of Rishi Sunak, he'll always be thinking, oh, but maybe something will happen, because otherwise he's toast, right? So I don't think there's a snap election. And the other one, the small majority. Please, let's avoid this magical thinking that power is just going to flop back into the laps of the left-wing Labour MPs. I love them. I wish it would. It isn't going to, right? The two groups of people who have the same motivated thinking that suddenly power is just going to flop into the laps of the SCG are them themselves and the hard-right apparatchiks in Keir Starmer's office that wants to get rid of them. Right? It isn't based in reality, because if you want to, let's say there's some bad bit of legislation that the Tories are bringing through and the SCG said, no, we're not going to vote for it. Do you honestly think that Keir Starmer wouldn't gleefully side, get Tory votes and Lib Dem votes or whatever to get through his piece of legislation to own the left? Of course he would. It is not a strategy. The do nothing and maybe something will turn up is not a strategy for power, and it's not one that we should accept. And the question is, and again, I say this with a lot of love and respect for individual members of the SCG, but you have to question, what is the point of being a socialist member of parliament if you can't say and do socialist things? Now, this is not me saying go and throw yourself on a grenade, and this is not me saying that that they're not in a very difficult situation, but to just think, well, if we do nothing, maybe something will turn up, is not a strategy, is not something that meets the needs of the moment, which are extremely stark, extremely, extremely stark.
Thank you, James. Okay, brilliant. We've got lots of questions and comments out of that round. I said I would come to you in the lovely blue shirt. I think your microphone's coming from this end. Blue? Blue?
It's kind of black, no? Oh, that guy.
Hi. The question is, should we, in effect, launch if you like, a parallel manifesto? Because what beguiles the left over there, we've got obviously several left organisations. Is there something, the bottom line, we can agree on climate change and how we're going to fund it, which goes into, obviously addressing social problems as well? And what would these speakers think on that? Because going forward, as you say, the left is in it's a tighter situation I've been in, being involved with the left for a long, long time. If we're going to hit the streets, what are we going to hit the streets with? Because if you do any canvassing for Labour at the moment, they have a script. Have you ever been canvassing for Labour recently? Basically, it's just to get out the vote. Don't attempt to try and engage with anybody. Certainly don't try and persuade them. So there's a problem of getting our socialist ideas out there during a general election campaign. You get sucked into a just get out the Labour vote sort of style campaign. So what are the ideas of communicating? So can we have a joint, if you like, not a joint platform, but a consensus? I'm sure we could get one. So at least amongst, the left, they have something to put out there. What is the bottom line? And I totally agree with working inside the Labour Party and out on the streets. It's very, very important. But people like Ed Miliband could be very isolated, trying to take the Green New Deal forward. So it is important to keep those channels open and to support people who are okay. They're not hard. They're not left as we are, but certainly they are trying to take that agenda further forward.
Thank you very much. Right at the back, in the beautiful orange high-vis.
Thanks very much. I'll just follow on from the first question, actually, with regard to climate change and the point that James made. Heating now appears to be non-linear. This September was 1.8 degrees above the pre-industrial average. To quote, it changes everything. This general election and what happens next. So what I'd like to understand from the speakers is, what are your proposals, given that we really do risk the collapse of organised civil society and 1,000 million people dying early this coming century? So for me, it's a moral issue, and it's also, how does your politics respond to this level of threat? It's everything. It's not a priority issue. It is going to be what we face moving forward.
Thank you. And then we have our comrade right round here. I'm slowly going to move back, don't worry, we've got plenty of time. Thank you.
Hi, I wanted to dig a bit deeper on James's point. Next year, for me, will be the first year since 1973 that I haven't been a member of the Labour Party. Work it out, it's a long time. So I have no hesitation next year in voting Labour, but from this day onwards, I'm working to get another party. The Labour Party is absolutely finished. The way they treated Corbyn, Diane Abbott, Jamie Driscoll, the pro-apartheid stand, I can't stomach it anymore.
Should we hear back? Yeah. So we've got 2 questions on other parties' manifestos, and then one on the moral question of the election. Who wants to start? Should we go back on this way?
Oh, no, I was going to go very quickly,
Yeah,
get it out of the way. On the manifesto thing, we've already got one, 2017, I would say, is probably the best document we've got within the public consensus that people are aware of, that we can remember. So, I don't know. Look, I work in comms. The idea of having to get everyone in a room and composite all of our ideas into one document fills me with dread. So let's just communicate them in person, I think, probably, than getting them written down. In terms of the climate question, look, I've been to COP, and it is a bureaucratic nightmare that tends to progress nothing. And in terms of what I advocate for, look, I'm not a politician. It's why I'm not, because I don't have the answer for that. But it's quite clear to me that parliamentary politics is not the place that we achieve radical change around climate. I think movements like Green New Deal are absolutely the place that we come together and talk about solutions. But without going into too much, I really like that book, How to Blow Up a Pipeline. That's my position on those things. Thanks.
Great. Yeah, go for it.
So I don't think that we need a parallel document that lays out a manifesto in detail. What we need is demands that come from the movements, and a few key demands. But what those are obvious, because they're the things that movements are demanding, and they are also things that have massive supermajority support. Right? The reason why we don't have power is because the rich and powerful have all the power, right? It isn't because we don't have good ideas and people don't like them and we haven't commsed it cleverly enough, right? It's fundamentally a question of power. So our response needs to be fundamentally building power. I'll take those 2 questions together because they're sort of related. Sarah, I completely, obviously, share your analysis, which is why I think having the sort of strategy that the left would have 50 years ago or 30 years ago, which is, a long-term strategy, where, let's see, like Frankie was saying, in 30 years' time, maybe we'll be passing on pearls of wisdom to people that are somehow have retaken the Labour Party. And there isn't time for that. You're absolutely right. There objectively is not time for that. And so we need to be in a position as the left and progressive movements to be able to meaningfully challenge for power by the end of the decade. So, we need to have sufficient power that we can nationalise and dismantle North Sea oil, for example, by 2031 at the latest. So we need to be in power by 2029, 2030 at the latest, which means that the left pole of opposition to the next government needs to be able to take advantage of some moments that will come to cohere as a force, either somehow, none of us know the future, to take control and utterly remake the Labour Party in a way that we completely failed, if I'm honest, to do so. Utterly remake it into a different type of party, or conditions might mean that there is then that forms into another party. But that's the stakes that we're in, which is why, going back to my point about trying to get an extra MP here, an extra MP there, or maybe after the election the SCG will have a little bit more power. All of that stuff is perfectly worthy and makes difference around the edges, but we don't have the edges. They're falling into the sea.
Two questions, right? I tend to agree with James, demands more than policies. And I think one of the kind of missed opportunities over the last year is the failure of Enough is Enough to properly sustain itself as a meaningful organisation and movement. I think that captured a kind of mood on the ground coming out of the industrial struggles, articulate what a lot of people were feeling with 5 clear demands and an identifiable leadership, but 3-4 months after it completely failed and fizzled out. Some sort of, demands would be great, policy communication's really important, but ultimately, I think the power side of it is the more important part of that dynamic, and actually getting out and doing the community organising around these issues, and not just relying on demands to sort of raise consciousness and bring people together. I mean, climate change is a moral issue, and I'm very sympathetic and supportive to the way GSO have kind of pushed up the agenda, but I don't necessarily see politics as like an exercise in morality. Going out to millions of people and trying to make the cases for the urgency of climate change won't work if we take an approach of trying to make moral arguments. We have to appeal to people's interests, especially in industries that stand to lose out because of the transition to carbon-friendly economy. We need to be going there and doing that actual community organising, talking to people not in the language of morality, but in the language of how your interests and your community's interests are best served by a just transition. So that would be my political approach to that, though. In terms of what my politics are and my strategies are, don't foreclose any options. I agree with James in terms of the limits of parliamentary politics in this current moment, but it would be silly to kind of lose those relationships and that small positional power that those MPs have. So yes, we need direct action, we need trade union struggle, we need community organising, we need politicians at every level of government working together in a coordinated fashion. Not one theory of change or strategy is appropriate to the given moment. We need an experimental approach that combines and tries all of those at different times. So that would be how I'd approach that issue.
I agree with Andrew, and I agree, I guess, James, in your approach of working backwards. Of if science tells us we need to massively shift our economies by 2030 and come off North Sea oil and gas, that's the timeline that almost exists for our organizing too. I guess the thing that I would slightly change is yes, the left needs to be in power, but the way that the left gets into power is by mainstreaming. In that I fundamentally believe that our vision of the future, our demands are popular, and I think sometimes we forget that. I think the majority of people do agree with us, and what if we operate from that perspective? That we know that there are people sitting at home who do have the same fears as us, who do believe in the same things, and our job is to get them out on the street. And that's the only way we propel ourselves into power, is by not being on the fringes, is not by marginalizing ourselves, but mainstreaming ourselves. To the lady at the back, I think, whilst I appreciate the limits of parliamentary power, I have also been engaged in this movement for over a decade and have, to my sins, gone to about 8 COPs, and every year come back with the same conclusion, which is there's a lot movements can do, but we will not sort of tackle the climate crisis at the scale and speed necessary without using state apparatus. We cannot transition as people from the North Sea. We cannot transition alone how we power our economy. We need state power to do that, and that's the only way we'll be able to do it at the speed and scale necessary. And therefore, we should keep our eyes on the prize. That yes, we're organizing our communities, yes, we're investing in new leadership, but ultimately the goal is to take power. It is to work with whoever will work with us, and I think it's worth remembering that not everybody's the same in Parliament. There are people, Ed Miliband's gone on a freaking political journey too. He's not where we want him to be. He's definitely not the same guy of 2015. And these are humans too. And we should be able to work with people that we think we can get around the table around our agenda. And part of the way that we build leverage, I think, and I've just spotted Jamie in the room, who I've never met before, but I think we do have a massive test. All of the things that we're talking about, whether it's writing a manifesto or a new party, we have an election that's coming up in May. That is a moment that we can sort of test the leverage that we have. Can we beat out the Labour Party in a really important election and organize it around a candidate that has proven to stand with our movements and that has proven to deliver on the sorts of policies that we support? That is the only challenge between us in doing that, is organizing. And if we operate from the perspective that people do agree with us, then really it's on us to organize and out-organize the Labour Party and other parties. I don't think we can do that at a general election, but I definitely think we can do it for Jamie, and I think that's the test that sort of we need to walk away with and really prepare ourselves to take on.
Okay, lovely people, hands in the air. Right, we've got a question. We've got a question at the front, and then behind the comrade in the, I'm going to go with cream as well. So firstly, there we go. Oh, over here, sorry. Oh, we'll go. You know what, go for it, and then we'll come to you.
Yeah, sorry. So you all talk about a Labour victory as an almost foregone conclusion. So despite the lead that Labour has in the polls, Keir Starmer himself is very unpopular. Is there any precedence to an unpopular leader gaining a large majority in Parliament?
Thank you very much. And then, do you want to put your hand there? We go.
Hi, I've just got a couple of reflections rather than questions. I hope that's okay. The first reflection is just a bit about my experience. So I think we need a collective, member-led think tank, an organising space for this progressive left, which I personally feel that I've yet to see. I used to be a member of the Fabian Society, where I didn't realise at that time it was very much on the moderate side, and because I didn't agree with a lot of the politics, I tried to find an equivalent in this progressive left. It wasn't there. I emailed lots of organisations that profess to have these organising spaces where people can come together, think, generate ideas, build movements, build networks. I'd email, and I wouldn't get a response back. So this is actually the first time I've been able to come out to this festival, and this is my first attempt at trying to build that network and try and organise and meet people and build momentum, no pun intended. So it'd be great to see a version of the Fabian Society, which I do think the way they go about organising people is really good. The second reflection I have is it's really great to be able to bypass the media and do a lot of the canvassing work. And I do think there is merit in that idea, but I canvassed like mad in the 2019 election, mainly in Stoke-on-Trent, and by that time it was too late. There's a level of irrationality in the media where people just didn't want to connect to the ideas. They were connected to this image of Jeremy Corbyn, and it was so difficult to actually have a productive discussion. So I suppose there is a question in there, which is how do we break that? Because that's where the chokehold is that irrational projection that's been generated is just a block to actually being able to connect to people beyond the people who are able to come out here.
Thank you so much. And then we have the hand round here. Just, yes, you're pointing in the right direction, all the way along at the end of the line. Thank you.
Hello. Slightly different experience in terms of canvassing. So I canvassed in the last 3 elections, and what impressed me was that all sorts of people were thinking really carefully and really deeply about the 2017 manifesto. And what strikes me, the problem of the left is that the left isn't drilling down enough into the practicability of realising, for example, nationalisation of energy. So where I am in Sheffield, there's a big conversation going on at the moment with the steel union, Unite, where, and it's a bit technical, so I won't get it right, but it's the difference between having steel production, which is potentially using renewable electricity, and carrying on with the old furnaces. Unite actually wants to carry on with the old furnaces because of the loss of jobs that's entailed in using the new form of production. And what strikes me about the left is that the left just doesn't drill down enough into what's actually going on, what the pros and cons are, what the practicalities are of actually nationalising energy production, for example. People see our policies, lovely ideas, but we actually don't think it's very practical. How do you do it? How do you think you're going to do it? And we need a lot more knowledge and a lot more drilling down so we can have these convincing discussions with people.
Brilliant, thank you. I've got 2 very eager hands waving. So can we have the one right at the back and then the comrade over here? Yeah, that's you. Yeah. So sorry, right at the back against the wall.
Hello. Yeah, I think the left, the most significant point that I've heard is that we have a crisis of leadership. You know, leadership is for our section of the party has been the hardest thing for us to find someone to band behind. You know, someone who will lead us. I am trying to be comradely here, but you know, I saw Jeremy speak for the first time in person at this conference last year, and I get it. You know, that when I saw him, you know, I got it. Like I can see why the country were like, how can we vote for this man? You know, with the apparatus that were against him, with all of the tools that they can use. I think we need someone stronger. I think, you know, the biggest point that we've made is that the left needs to be stronger. When we are in power, you know, we need to, I don't know, do what they're doing to us now, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you. And then this comrade in the blue with the hand in the air. Great.
Thank you. Can I say it's wonderful to see so many young people taking an interest in politics, because sometimes people of my generation get rather distressed that it seems to be grey heads everywhere. There are a few grey heads here too, like me. Really, I think I'm taking up a point that was made over there, but condensing it. Corporate power is now so entrenched in every aspect of this country. It's a major, major job to get through that. And with a right-wing press as well, it's a very difficult task. I don't see how, honestly, it can be done. But I want it to be done.
Thank you very much. Okay. Ooh, yeah, clap. Let's clap away. Okay, I think we'll come back to our speakers. Should I start with you?
I think unpopular leaders have won elections. I think it's certain people may know better than me, but certain times Thatcher was very incredibly personally unpopular, but won successive majorities. I think it's inevitable now that Labour will have a majority. I think it's sometimes, not for yourself, but for some people, a bit of kind of projection and wish fulfillment that Labour's lead will come down, which might give the left some more leverage in that conversation. In terms of like Sheffield and the transition, it goes back to the point I made earlier about the need for us, let's call ourselves the climate movement, to be actively engaging with trade unions and having those conversations. Now, I work for an organisation that currently has a lot of work invested in supporting shop stewards to develop just transition plans to get that preparation in place now. So when the struggle does kick off, they have those resources and tools. So, and also, I guess it goes back to the further point about the limits of certain strategies. Like, totally support the direct action that JSO and others are doing, but equally it's incredibly removed from the kind of workplace struggles that people are going to have over the next few years to make sure that they don't lose jobs and that what jobs come have good terms and conditions as well as being climate friendly. And it's precisely why we need a multiplicity of strategies in Parliament, in trade unions, direct action, legislation, whatever it might be. But I agree we need to be much more present in those conversations, especially in those one industry towns where one factory goes, the whole community is ripped apart. We saw that in the miners' strike, and in some ways there's similar dynamics playing out now, and we can't afford to be absent from those conversations as the climate movement, or simply point the finger at trade unions when they take reactionary positions on oil and other industries. We have to be in those conversations and supporting the better parts of the trade union movement.
On Keir being an unpopular leader, I mean, that's great. I think that just gives us more leverage, right? We can't do anything about the fact that the Labour Party is going to win the next government, but we want them to be in a precarious position so that we have leverage. And him being unpopular, if we're able to turn out a widened left, a mainstream left opposition, and I think that's one of the ways that we can sort of push on the doors of the Labour Party. On canvassing, someone said something about canvassing. I also, first time I actually did go canvassing, to be honest with you, was in 2019, and I was knocking on the doors of my neighbouring constituency in Harrow East, and I was shocked by what people were saying on the door. And these are people, I've lived in Harrow almost all of my life. And I was like, I don't know these people and I don't know the things that they're communicating. And I think the truth is, we can't turn out around elections and canvass and think that we're gonna have a transactional relationship with people on the door and that they're gonna vote for who we tell them to vote for. That's why we need to engage in relational canvassing, where we are deeply entrenched in these communities and we're talking to them through the lifetime of a parliament about the issues, so that when we do turn up around an election, we are trusted messengers. We can have conversations with them. And so that was the mistake, is that, you know, like everyone else, I turned up on the door in 2019 and I was like, I don't know who these people are and I don't know what they're talking about, but they also didn't know who I was and what I was talking about. And so that's why I think just engaging in canvassing earlier, not just for electoral outcome, but like these are the people that we can turn out to marches, these are the people that we can organize, these are the people that we can point towards when a Labour-led government points to their whatever, if they've got focus groups or whatever the right wing's saying, we've actually got the people to hand and the people in the constituencies that matter to them. On Jeremy Corbyn, I mean, thanks for saying the difficult thing. It's the thing that maybe I would be too scared to say here, and it's not about a particular person. I think it is a problem across the left, right? And I think it does come from this thing that we put ideological purity as the number one thing over everything else. And we have experienced it in selections that we've been engaging in around the country, where people are willing to put their hat behind and organize for someone who is a terrible communicator, someone who isn't someone who would make it a day in Parliament, who wouldn't be able to communicate to constituents, who wouldn't be able to go on the media and mainstream our ideas. Why? Because they're ideologically pure. And that, we're not going to win with that kind of strategy. We need to be able to find people who represent the communities that they come from, who are great storytellers, who can go out. I mean, look at the power of Caroline Lucas. She's one MP in her entire political party, and look at the impact that she's been able to have through her lifetime in Parliament. She has put her party on the map. She has done a huge amount of work to take our politics to the left, to mainstream ideas as one person. Why? Because she is a trusted messenger. She's a great communicator. She's a campaigner. She knows how to work across Parliament. Those are the people we need to seek out. We need to really sort of get away from this knee-jerk instinct of trying to find people who we just implicitly trust, right? And then the thing on corporate power, I think that's something that sort of stems beyond the Labour Party. I think as the climate movement, actually, we've been very terrible about talking about who's to blame. We need to, you know, all great stories have who are the bad guys? Who are the enemies? Who are we organizing against? Who's responsible for this? I think we've started talking about fossil fuel companies a lot more, and that's largely to do with the record profits, but we should be extending it to corporations. I think they're an easy target. I think it's a really simple story that we can tell the public, and that we can sort of then, based on that, and the public imagination around it, think about ways that we free our politics and our societies from corporate power.
Just quickly on your thing about movements, I was really surprised actually to hear you say that, because to be honest, there is an abundance of movements and places to go to, think tanks, groups, you name it, there's that. And when you said momentum, it made me think like, I mean, that was momentum. It was that place where there was organizing happening, there was political discussions, there was strategy about filling Labour Party conference with politically switched on, educated, articulate, erudite delegates who went up, made those arguments, won those concessions. I mean, when the going was good, there was nothing like it. It was phenomenal, the kind of power that we had. And it's gone, it's waning, but we can get that back. So, I mean, it's up to you about who you want to go and join, but I would suggest going downstairs, and I mean, there'll be hundreds of people that will want to chat to you about which movement you should join. On the question of the thing that I was going to talk about, that's it, unite. Yeah, look, the problem is, and I will address the elephant in the room here, for the large majority of people, climate change is a middle class issue. It's not, I don't think it is, but if you talk to people, generally speaking, particularly in working class communities, they will feel, on the whole in Britain, that conversations about climate change are quite a middle class, even bourgeois kind of thing to talk about when they come from mining communities where, you know, they haven't worked for 30 years and have been crushed by, you know, the right in this country. The challenge, and I think this is what you do really well, is how do you bridge those two communities together? How do you organise the industrial working class with probably the more academic, liberal side of the climate movement, which is talking about things like science and literature and culture, essentially, when we talk about climate change? It can be done, and I think it's being done very well in the US. The issue for Unite, and I will put this question to you because I think about this a lot. If you're Unite, you have this thing about climate change, which is like, there's no jobs on a dead planet, right? That's basic, but it seems like a future thing. It's kind of further away. But you're sat in a room with a load of reps, right, who are saying to you, we're not going to agree to this climate-friendly, new industrial thing in our workplace because it's going to lose jobs. What do you do when you're a trade union rep? And I'm asking you as a trade union rep, you save the jobs, which is why a just transition is the most single important thing right now in the trade union movement, which is where Unite, I believe, can be a leading voice on this, which is that we advocate for a just transition that puts workers at the heart and centre of any movement on climate change. And it is being done, and that's where we need to see that joined up thinking between the trade union movements and the social movements coordinating with one voice. And that is where they will break us, I think, when we have these conversations about climate change in the future. Because the Tories want to push forward that talking point, like you, Les, that any work on climate change is this liberal, middle-class pastime, and it's not real for working people. But, you know, who dies in climate breakdown? It's not rich people, is it? It's us, it's working-class people. And if you make that argument coherently, and the unions need to be doing that as well, then I think you can get past those individual conversations. But the issue about your local community is like, what is the biggest impact right now on your local community going to be? In the future, yes, it will be climate change, but at the moment, it's those jobs. So you have to make those strategic way-ups all the time. But if you're in those meetings and you're meeting with those reps, there are ways that you can become a just transition rep at Unite, right? And if we had been better at organising to get those just transition reps in the room when these things inevitably came up, maybe we could be having those conversations. But we're not, but we are getting there, and that's why that organising is so important.
In 1979, Margaret Thatcher was less popular than Jim Callaghan, and they won a decent majority. So, you know, there is historical precedent for it. On the Fabians, the most disgusting and wretched part of the entire Labour movement, who 100 years ago when they were formed, 100 years ago when they were formed, they said, socialism is inevitable. So there's no point attacking capitalists. We just need to redistribute from slightly better off workers to slightly less well-off workers. And today they say socialism can never happen, so there's no point fighting capital. Instead, we should just redistribute from slightly better off workers to slightly less well-off workers. But there is one thing that we can learn from the Fabians, and one thing that Momentum should learn from the Fabians, which is they have an extremely good membership policy. And their extremely good membership policy is as follows. You are eligible for membership of the Fabian Society if you are eligible for membership of the Labour Party, which means you don't have to be a member of the Labour Party to be a member of the Fabians. You just can't be in another political party. And I think that Momentum, an organisation that you could join, should also make that change and go back to that policy. I think it would make it much more vibrant, and it would make more sense for lots of people on the left. I want to knit together the Sheffield point and the two corporate power points, because there are a couple of countries that are oil producers that have worse inequality than this country, that have histories of military rule, and that have extreme corporate control of their media, worse than ours. And these are two countries that have left-wing governments with powerful oil worker trade unions that have decarbonisation, just transition policies. And these two countries are Colombia and Brazil, and the oil workers' unions in those two countries. Now, they, of course, precarious, of course, they can lose power. History zigs and zags, it doesn't move in straight lines, but they, in both cases, were able to overcome corporate power in all senses, media and everything else. And a big lesson that we can take from both of those cases is they have extremely powerful, well-organized and militant movements, trade unions, peasants' organizations, Afro-Colombian or Afro-Brazilian organizations, indigenous movements, urban housing movements that knit together to put politicians into power who you can take the approach that's been spoken about, who will get some things wrong and they can be criticized, or they can be cheered when they're doing things because they are, at least in large part, from those movements. So it is not impossible. You know, the history isn't inevitable at all. You know, things are bad. You know, Sarah was saying beforehand how we've entered non-linear. Like Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the UN, who gets given all of the science, right? Poor guy. He's like bashing his head against the wall again and again. Wake up, can't you see? You know, last week he said, we've opened the gates of hell. He's trying to get these world leaders, of course, who won't listen. It's not in their interest to listen. He's trying to get them to listen. He's saying, we've opened the gates of hell. Honestly, it's coming. And, you know, Dante wrote that, you know, what's it say on the entrance to the gates of hell? You know, abandon hope, all ye who enter here. But Dante also says that the path to paradise starts in hell. So the situation may be extremely bad, but there are examples of over and over again of people coming together, organizing, uniting their efforts to organize, and then gaining political power and making real change. And that can happen again, and that can happen absolutely here. Things look absolutely bleak. You know, we've had a slightly depressing lunchtime where we're saying, we can do a bit here, or we can do a bit there, or we really need to build for the future, or me being super depressing and saying, no, look, don't bother, we need to do this other thing. But honestly, the ruling class are not in control of the situation. Like, it's falling apart for them as well. There are huge numbers of openings. So, yes, let's get organized.
Thank you very much, James. So we have 5 minutes left. So unfortunately, what I'm going to do is surprise the speakers, and I'm going to give you each 30 seconds. You want that to be yours? Okay. 30 seconds to wrap up. Be nice if it was positive. And for those people in the room who maybe aren't yet involved in their trade union or organizing in their community, what one thing would you suggest that they do going away from TWT? I'll give you 5 seconds to think, because I'm generous. James, do you want to just repeat what you just said?
Yeah, okay. Wherever you are, geographically, socially, whatever, if you're a tenant, find other tenants and organize with other tenants. If you're a worker, find the other, your colleagues and start organising with them, whatever it is that you are, and then link those things up. That's the only way that we actually build power over time. That's the way that I completely agree with Fatima, we need state power, of course. And I'm not against, what was the term, parliamentary power. I think it would be a great idea. It'd be lovely if we had some. We don't have any. How are we going to build it? And the way in which we build it, every single person in this room thinks about where they are, what they have in common with other people, organise other people on that basis, and then unite as much as possible. That's the way that we're going to build power and escape from hell to paradise.
It's a tall order, isn't it? Just go back to your communities, get active. Whatever current struggles there are in your community, go and show up and support the people that are doing this work already. If you've already got a cause that you're working on, don't give up. It's hard at the moment to not feel completely abject despair at everything. But that's when we're at our weakest, right? When we're sad and when we're beaten. We're not sad and beaten. We might have lost this thing with the Labour Party for now. Just forget about it, man. Go and do something that we're winning at. We're winning at loads of stuff. Climate, housing, you name it. Trade union active, strike. There is stuff you can go out and feel positive about. Go and join it. Give your expertise. Learn, and then we live to fight another day,
I love this. I'm so used to being on panels and being the token person who goes, let's go out and organize. And I'm so moved. And I was moved by James's Dante quote. And this is, a lot of my work has actually been being in solidarity and working with international movements. The past 4 years has been the longest 4 years working consistently on UK organizing. And I think when it comes to moments like this, I remember the movements I supported and the context in which they find themselves. We are being impacted by the climate crisis, but not equally. There are people who are literally losing their homes, their livelihoods, their communities that don't have access to the same, routes to democratic power. And so it's okay to be momentarily depressed. It's okay to be angry, and we do have our own issues, but we have no excuse to not organize. And we're not just organizing for ourselves, and we're not just organizing for our communities. There are communities around the world who have suffered at the hands of the UK's colonial power that continues to extract from their communities. And the bare minimum that we can do to stand in solidarity with them is do our bit to organize, to make sure that we build new leadership, that we take over our governments and deliver a better and fairer future for our people, but also people around the world.
So I don't have much to add beyond that, other than, there are innumerable things you can do locally, whether it is your tenants union, your trade union, your local abolition group, your mutual aid group, your CLP. There's no excuse not to get out and do stuff. I think ultimately all of this comes down to really accepting that the left we built from 2015 to now, or 2015 to 2019, has ended. That chapter has closed. And the task for all of us together is to collectively figure out what this new left we build looks like. And I think with everybody's kind of potential in this room and our communities, we've got good resources to do that. It's just a question of getting out there and doing the work.
Woo! Brilliant. Well, that brings us to a close. Thank you all so much for all your amazing questions and thoughts. A big round of applause to yourselves and also to our speakers.